Hi there, Randi Green here, and welcome to another podcast where I dive into, explore, and investigate some of the challenges that we have ahead of us as a civilization on this planet. In my mind, the first most important step is, of course, to work with who and what we are as individuals. The next important step is to learn to work together as a team across borders, across nations, across sections on our planet. But I also know that that is a very large challenge, and this challenge will unfold from 2025 until 2034, where not only a lot of the old racial grids from the 2-8 pillar will come to life, do its activation and clean-out processes, but also tap into what we could say the next set of our journey. We are in a way doing it a little bit upside down because we've been through the 3-9 pillar, which is technically the activation and clean-out processes from the new grand cycle on the reality field configuration that were tied into the 3-9 pillar. But it's important because the 3-9 pillar was our planet, which is technically a third dimensional planet. Not correct, but we could call it that. It's an outer domain planet. It's a density 1 planet. And it was not originally positioned as the third planet from the sun, but it was placed that way so it could keep its number 3, its outer domain configuration. So we could say that we have the third planet, which is our Earth, density 1 planet, and that was connected to the Andromeda system, hence the 3-9 configuration. This configuration ensures what we could say an interconnectedness to the Andromedan system. Unfortunately, not the future version of the Andromedan system. Again, many of you might like to remote view into the Andromedan system, thinking you will see a sprawling and spawning life and other civilizations. But if you follow along the line with the neural network and the current capacity of mind that you have now, that is imbued with third cycle energies, all you will then see is what remains of the Andromedan system as it looked after the timeline event. Because the Andromedan system were hit pretty hard by the timeline event. The inner domain, the Andromedan galaxy, which is the Andromedan system, I'm not talking about the constellation. As it were hit by the timeline event, the Andromedan galaxy crystallized as one of the first galaxies of the inner domains to be affected by the timeline event. That shouldn't have been possible, but it was due to the amount of technology they had already chosen to unfold there. So the reconfiguration and the activation and clean-out processes of the 3-9 pillar were not just only about our reality field. It was also about the inner domains as well as our connectivity to the Andromedan galaxy. Science tells us that we will get connected to the Andromeda galaxy at some point. And they are correct because we are intertwined. Our galaxy and the Andromedan galaxy are twin galaxies. They are two parallel systems that are very close to each other in terms of universal lineages. So the humanities in the Andromeda galaxy and the humanities inside our galaxy were once very similar. Coexisting, working together, existing together as two similar universal lineages that unfolded to a large degree the same type of consciousness, had chosen to work with to a large degree the same type of holographic-energetic units. So our systems were similar. Their inner domain and our inner domain were very similar. We could, in many ways, jump between the systems as we liked. This is also when we talk about some of the incoming groups that have traveled here in the older times as part of the mission statement, transfigured to get into our solar system, have used some of the old gate systems in the Andromeda galaxy. However, this is outdated technology and cannot be recommended. Hence, there's no purpose of us traveling to the Andromedan galaxy. The future Andromedan galaxy is in the 6th dimension. they made the jump a long time ago. Once they discovered that the fourth and the fifth level of their middle domains began to crystallize, and with that, no longer progression was possible, they decided altogether to go into what we call remission of their entire system, shutting it down artificially, let it go into crystallization and let it go into the transformational processes that leads to dustification, and jumped out of it as a massive configuration, a massive reconfiguration. They jumped as a lineage altogether, working as a team to do so. Yes, there were losses, and the costs were severe. It was cutting away their entire outer domain and cutting away what we will call the fourth and the fifth dimension, and then starting anew in the sixth. The sciences they had to develop to get to that point in time, still struggling with the effects of the timeline event and the inverted regressed type of genetics that were unfolding inside their civilizations as well. What was their salvation was that they made the jump early. What is our doom is that we didn't. So when we talk about the new core domain, they are part of these civilizations of the Andromedan system that made the early jump. They saw the signs, and they made that tough decision of cutting loose at an early stage when there was still a viability rate, and they let that viability rate disintegrate and cease to exist, to cut loose, to disintegrate the inverted genetics that leads to the regression. So they acted on the signs very early on, compared to our system that did not respond at all. Contrary, our system and the elders of our system, they clung on to the idea that as long as there was viability rate, then there was also salvation. Then things could change. Then we could upgrade. Then we could heal. As long as there was just one viable holographic energetic unit and one viable original lineage consciousness unit, then everything could be solved. Everything could be re-blossomed. Everything could reunite. But the matter of the fact is, reality is very dissimilar. The matter of the fact is, as we did not take the challenges as we should, and the majority of the human population were suddenly no longer from this system, but from other systems. And even though the elders thought that the infusion of the other planets, as I talked about in the previous podcast from Maldak or from Mars, that would assist our planet in its continuation processes, the calculation was wrong. Because what was shifted into our system from Mars and what was shifted into our system from Maldak? From Maldak, a type of technology that didn't belong here. From Mars, a type of regressed configuration that didn't belong here. Insectoids and avians are not part of the configuration of Earth. Mammals are. Reptoids came from Maldak, not part of our configuration either. And with that opening up to different systems, that the 410 pillar, of which Mars is the base planet, going up to the Draco system, which is the 10th system in our universal structure, connecting the Dracos to our planet. And with that opening up the gates for them to come in and colonize. So that was not the right decision, was it? Is life so important to preserve that it leads to colonization, enslavement, imprisonment, torture, death, oblivion? Is that a life? Or would it have been more honorable and distinguishable to cut loose from the very get-go? Different opinions. We can argue with that and about that for a very long time. There are pros, there are cons, and there are pros and there are against. We don't really know, because that was the original issue, as we had in the original wells, where we had the 3 lineages that did not live up to the requirements and what to do with them. So when we talk about the new core domain and the technologies that comes from the new Andromeda system, and I'm not talking about the constellation, The constellations on our sky, in my opinion, is a holographic energetic overlay. Science tells us that the stars we see in the sky no longer exist, and I agree. They are the remnant light of what once were, or a holographic energetic overlay. So we can say the new core domain from the Andromedan system. In many ways, they have developed into a very dissimilar lineage to ours. I see remnants of the original civilizations. I can, when I'm in contact with them, ask them to resume how they looked before they took off. And there I see my brothers and sisters. However, if I see them as they are now, because of the decisions they made, they are, to a vast degree, very alien to me. And I'm not sure that I really want to trust them. So, with my natural carefulness in coalitions and in alliances, I am saying, as long as I don't really know who and what you are, I'm not going to say thank you. I'm not going to align. I'm not going to accept. However, it's not always our free choice. So we have the future humanities that have aligned with these future Andromedan civilizations. The future humanities are the ones that grew out of the first run-through of our system. Now this is the mind-boggling part, that we have already run through several run-throughs of this planet and how it ends due to the law of the cycles. The first ones were run through with the Dracos completely in control. Then we had the other ones that were run under the Scavengers. Then we had the ones that ran under the Greys. Then we had the ones that ran under the forces of Atlantis. Then we had the ones that ran under the projects, under the military projects, and onward and so forth. Have these run-throughs been played out in real life? They've been played out in alternate reality sections, because our reality is not what it appears to be. And no, it's not the Matrix. But it plays out in different circles, and it can reset. It has a number of resets before it stops resetting and go into complete default, and then everything that's there will be pushed into the abyss because it was reconfigured as part of the less progressive universal structure, or the pillar project, to assist and upgrade the faulty, not complete 3 lineages that needed a bit of a helping hand to be able to exist in the new universal structures under the new agreed types of reality fields, as well as the new type of consciousness potentials that we chose to unfold under the 12 lineages. So the question is it a good idea that these Andromedan future lineages, with their very adamant, different type of political decision making compared to what was decided in our solar system, is it the solution for them to come in now as part of the 3-9 pillar and root in from where they reconnect from the future version of the Andromedan system and reconnect to the core of our planet from the future version of humanity, and then begin what we could call a forced-on reconfiguration of our planetary system and solar system to avoid it from going into complete default. And default here means that it reconfigures itself into the original configuration under the ancient ones. And if that happens, become completely uninhabitable for any type of life form that we can call the current form of humanity. Not even for the future version of humanity, or for the future version of the Andromedans. Because our universal structures, the entire sector that is here, were altered to accommodate for the faulty 3 lineages. And some of the Andromedans belongs to this, one of these lineages. So we're here having some of the future humans that belongs to the second group of the non-productive, so to speak, lineages that did not fall that didn't follow the original requirements and were part of the LPU project. And then one lineage that is not in coalition or collaboration with these two other lineages. So what you are to understand here is that the core of our planet and the future humanities are from the second group of the three lineages that did not have the requirements for the new universal cycles, but were assisted to get there, so they rely on technology. The same with the lineages of Andromeda. They lifted their system via technology. And then we have the first lineage that did not succeed at all. And they are not on the scene yet. They will come later on. In 20 years' time, then it will be the first lineage of the civilizations that had the need of help to do the reconfiguration into the universal lineages as they were in the beginning of this universal structure. So they are not on the scene yet. So we have these two groups, and the other, what we could say, 9 original lineages, of which most have done their upgrading and moved on. What is left of the original lineages are what's left of the genetic composition in the original solar system humanities that once existed here, now in complete oblivion. So they will activate as the planet and the solar system itself begins its reconfiguration, just waiting for the sun to get out of the artificial configuration, burn off these shields, and resume to its original configuration. As that happens, those of us who have the original solar system configuration will come to life, if there is any viable genetics left. In the meantime, we have the activation of the different groups and civilizations that were brought here from other systems that are more in alignment with the second and third type of lineage of the LPU project. These are technically also part of the colonizers. However, many of the colonizers were more in the group of insectoid and avian and reptoid. And as I said, they are not natural to our planetary system. So the future humanities that made it, because as our reality field reconfigures itself into its original outer domain configuration, the insects, the avians, and the reptoids can no longer exist here. So of course these three groups of colonizers have tried very hard to make this planet remain so they could exist here, either by a high level of carbon dioxide from fossil fuels, reptoid, or via different forms of artificial inserted quote-unquote spiritual programs, avian, or insert via different types of hybrid programs on the physical level, insectoid, all orchestrated via help of different types of android species. This is unnatural to our system. This is not a planet based upon technology in that way. So our bodies and our system discard it, breaks it down, stops producing what is needed to run these machines. So we get in lack of specific type of heavy metals that are used in these machines, and new science, new technology, and new types of inventions must be made. Again, harnessing energy, elements, components that destroys this world. So the future humanities are based upon what's left of the original civilizations that survived the transition under the insectoids in the transhuman agenda. They are survivors of the transition processes under the avians and the quote-unquote New Earth spiritual programs. They are the survivors of whatever was engineered as part of the extreme machine worlds under the Dracos and the Scavengers. Each one was a timeline that ran through into a specific future. How so can many different timelines conglomerate and catch up and merge and converge in the future, where whatever survived from the first run-through of the insectoid transhuman agenda, and the ones that survived from the second run-through under the avian agenda, and the ones that survived through the third run-through under the reptoid scavenger agenda, how can they converge in the future and survive and become one type of civilization that then travels back and become part of the future human civilizations, now mammal-based, with that as the basic configuration, which allows them to inhabit the core configurations as well as the core constructions, aka inner Earth. Because that's how timelines work. At some point, all timelines must converse and converge, not converse, but converge. They must meet up, become a nodal point for whatever is viable on these timelines will then meet up and begin to merge together. And we could say, if you want to make a picture, it's like you have whatever group was survivors of the first timeline, second and third. They will meet in some weird way in a nodal point where you could say, almost envision that they will come in each and one of their own crafts, enter into an artificial created holographic reality, look at each other and say which era, which timeline, which type of reality do you come from? And then look at each other and say, well, we all came from Earth. And then begin to compare notes and experiences and get to that insight, aha, so this, okay, now we get it. So that is what we need to change. The group of the insectoids, the group of the avians, the group of the scavengers, they decided to join fields and join knowledge and join technology, and then began to travel back on the different timelines to alter it, meaning that the ones from the scavengers, they traveled back into the insectoid, and the ones from the avians traveled into the scavengers and onward and so forth in different cycles, over and over and over again, until they got a footing from where they could repair. What was the main goal? Why could they meet up? Why could they converge? Because in that future, they reached the nodal point where the Andromedan galaxy, the future civilizations there, could reach them as a point in time, and by that teach them there is a solution, there is technology of reconfiguring the solar system so it doesn't go into complete default setting under the ancient ones. So this is part of the game, the plot, the plan, the scheme, the ideas, the strategy. You call it whatever you want, that they are now unfolding. It has taken them many travels back and forth in time, many losses, many alterations, many modifications, and many different types of insertions, many different types of operating vessels, many different types of mission statements to get to the point where they are now. Where are they now? Here at the latter part of the 3-9 pillar activation. Well, the first several run-throughs of the 3-9 pillar activation did not go well, as we know. And we have seen some of the glimpses of what went wrong in some of the first run-throughs. They have played out what we could say a shadow content of what originally was. That was part of the many first traveling back in times to ensure that it would not play out, but instead would fizzle out either as a simulation or in a movie or in a very weak form. As in, we saw all the movies that played up to the pandemic. Lots of energy were played out there on a consciousness collective level. But a remained had to be played out as well. So instead of it playing out in its full potentials, as it was timed to unfold, actually in 15 years, they seeded it back in time and artificially put it into, assimilated it into our collective reality field under the control of different types of technologies and countermeasures that would take away the seed that the future big hit were actually brewed upon. That big hit, and I'm deliberately avoiding certain words here, that big hit was from the activation processes of the 2-8 pillar that ties into the old racial network and grids of our planet. That's part of some of the issues of the second run-through under the avians that led to some very unfortunate futures. I've seen these futures as they were played out, and we have seen them played out in a lot of movies as well. The Walking Dead, the ones that are not humans, Birdcage, Bird Box, I think that's what it's called, right? Things like that, played out in movies, already played out in different variations so it wouldn't happen in real time. We've seen the transhuman first timeline and the first civilizations that were there run through into a completely technocratically driven reality in the future via movies, via certain groups inside humanity that are already merged with technology to such a degree that we can barely distinguish them from their computer anymore. They live in their programs, they are their programs. Children born to sit in front of a screen live with a screen in front of them all the time, living through the screen. Part of that as well. It's not pleasant, but to avoid larger disasters. So instead of the big cut loose that the Andromedans did, the plan was to do it in small steps, in small portions, here and there, outlet here and there, to avoid the big kaboom. And so far, they have succeeded to a large degree. Sometimes getting a little bit out of control, but then countermeasure it via technology to get it into what we could call an isolated, under control event. Is this the false flag? Well, these are part of the military projects that try to run their 2001 timeline. As you recall, I talked about other places. Beginning with a very big disaster action back in 2001 that altered the world into what we could call a more militaristic oriented world system, collaborating differently than we had in the 1950s as well as after the Second World War. So again, these are the factions of the different groups that were trying to play their timelines. You see, the moment certain groups begin to travel back and alter time, other groups begin to travel back in time and counter that so that the original timeline can play out. A weird game, isn't it? We've seen movies about that too. Timeline travel and the issues and the dysfunction that leads to. Now, when you alter one timeline, does it then breach into other timelines? Does it then create new timelines? Yes, it creates new timelines, but the effect of the old ones will still converge into the new timeline. So that's the advertedness that they must foresee. That's where they can take the controlled events and say, this must play out because it's part of the original timeline. It will hit this timeline at that point in time inside the new timeline, where it will then try to correct the new timeline and force it back to the original timeline via a specific event. So we must water out the original event so that the new timeline will not converge with the old. So that's the game. The game is to maintain the new timeline so that it will not merge with the old timeline where certain disasters will unfold. And with that also understanding that the new future human timeline will be under constant attack from the original first three timelines under the insectoids, which we had from 2016 to 2020. Under the scavengers, which we had from 2017 and until technically still in its making, and under the avian groups that have played out their card as part of what we would call the angelic races. Let me just call it that way, then I don't get into trouble. And the crystalline Syrian beasts. So we have had these different groups. They are not done yet. They have got things up their sleeves that they must throw at the new timeline to try to make it converge with their original timeline, where they are still in charge. So it is, in a way, a battle of timelines, and on the mechanics of timelines, of reality field events, of collectiveness and collective consciousness potentials, of collective choices, and of collective momentum of energy that pushes a timeline into a certain stream of holographic energetic units that allows it to unfold certain potentials. In the end, it all comes down to consciousness potentials that are actively interacting with the timeline, because the timeline only exists if there is consciousness attached to it. So that's the viability rate. So the best way to water out a timeline is to remove the viability rate from it, transfer the genetic composition and the genetics components, and I'm here talking about the consciousness units, from one timeline into another. That's the modification, and that's the transfer. Now, you can't hollow out a timeline of energetic and genetic potentials in one go. The Andromedans did so in several attempts, and the fields that happened collapsed too quickly, and that led to ramification in the future timelines, meaning that the ripple effect of what was collapsed in the past timelines would then, unfortunately, also disintegrate what was in the future timelines. So it has to be done in stages, slowly, painfully, slowly, over centuries, traveling back and forth in time. But if you constantly can go back to a nodal point in the future where all the timelines converge, and from there being connected to the Andromedan system that are now under the progressive civilizations, whatever they have turned into, dissimilar as they were from the original ones, at least we could say that the point of converge and the nodal connectedness to the future is within a progressive system and not the opposite. The opposite has the same converge point, a nodal point where they converge and where they connect to the future systems that these timelines play into. And they too are traveling back and doing the exact same thing. These are some of the wars that are played out in our solar system. The drone wars. I think that Kalontics call them the electric wars, where we have AI that plays in and fights with each other. This is still going on in the fifth dimension to some degree between the cubes and the different types of technologies that were imbued with consciousness units from the Maldakian system, as well as from Mars, as well as from some of the original solar system humanities. So a lot of struggle is going on the different levels of our reality field. So no wonder the world is on fire. No wonder things are heating up. No wonder things are collapsing. With that in mind, it's also important to understand that the technology they're inserting now is technology that must be built in stages. So those of us who are connected to the original domain and were part of the original solar system humanities, of which the future civilizations are here now part of the core domain, of which used to be connected to the original Andromedan system. We see what's going on and we understand what's going on. Whether we like it or not, the choice has been made for us. We are like observers in a weird game of transformational processes and reconstruction, like being on a building site where we don't really have any influence on what's going on. And I am one of the ones that are observing this. I don't have much to say once and when I'm dragged into the councils where they elaborate on what they are doing, the councils between the future humanities and the Andromedan system in their converging point in the future, their nodal point, where they collaborate and talk in these quote-unquote councils using future technology I have little understanding of. And they travel back and they decide how's the next mission going to be. And I'm sitting there in the outer realm, in the outer ring, and not having any influence. For that, you have to be in the inner rings. But I can observe, so I know, and then I can adjust. And then I can say, well, now this is happening or that is happening. But because I have little influence there, I also have little influence on the counter forces that are then coming in thinking by targeting me and others that are present at the councils of the original solar system civilizations. If they can get a stronghold on us, well, then they can prevent the future timelines from being seeded in. And all I can say is that those of us who are part of this willingly or unwillingly, observing it and living with the knowledge of this is going on, but having very little influence. We similarly have no influence at all at these future timelines, because even though we are there perceiving and seeing things, and by the old law, should be able to connect to the future nodal point, since our consciousness is present there. The matter of the fact is that our reality field configuration inside this system is so dissimilar to what it is in the future that no matter what they do to us, inside this system will not change the new timeline. So when I have made this little movie about seeding a new timeline, the future humanities, it's just a message. That's all I can be, a messenger, not an influencer. I've given the old teachings as I recall them. I follow it to the large degree myself. But at the same time, so many things are going on, so many shenanigans from the different factions on the different timelines, working pro and against, altering, modifying, changing, pulling in, pulling out, adapting, whatever's going on, things coming into my field, changing it for a period of time until I repair it. My everyday life is just to keep my own configuration intact. Has very little to do with participating in any future or any big governmental plans or governance ideas of how this future of our system is to be. The only intention I can set is, let it be a better future for all. So when that's understood as well, those of us who are inside the enclosure, we might see and observe, and we have little influence. But that does not make that we are victimized. That does not mean that we don't have the capacity to make a difference. We can look at this and say changes are happening. Things are being averted. It's a little bit of a roller coaster, but we can still be change makers. We can still be forerunners. We can still be pioneers. We can still look into, at least that's my standpoint. Yes, I am being thrown around in a lot of stuff, and sometimes very unpleasant. It makes me regress. It makes me sometimes be completely overshadowed by things I would prefer not to be overshadowed by, and by that get imprints into my field that will take me days to clear out. But as I get back into my balance point where I know this is my configuration, now I have that amount of kindness and light and understanding and compassion that I know is part of my field. And at the same time, I have a sharp mind that can deduce and work both inside the base program configuration of mind and extend into the expanded awareness and the double awareness of the higher order energies and the original sciences, and begin to scout for solutions there of the original holographic energetic network. I can look at that and say, as part of the old programs, last time that our world was under density 1 energies, and some of the sciences that we played out there to make it an inhabitable planet again, and some of the configurations we had in our energy system that were after timeline event, but prior to some of the new reseedings that happened once the Ice Age was over. I have new sets of knowledge to draw upon. I have new sets of ideas of this is who we are now as a psychotherapist, as well as some of the things I have gone through, as well as some of the things I know that will come, whether to what extent they will come, to what degree they will come, whether or not the future humanities will succeed in water them out or place them in different nodal points in time so they don't have the same impact rate, but are less hit less energetically, and I'm here talking about complete alteration of a holographic energetic energy system, because that's what these huge hits on timelines will do. That's these where they literally splinter either a timeline into the abyss, or it reunites it into being a fruitacious, prosperous timeline that will lead to an upgrade and lead to a new future for all. So If we are saying, well, we know these dynamics and sciences of the timelines, and we know the different factions that are playing against it, and we know that we are, to a large degree, observers in this very weird timeline battle that we are part of. And we know that the futures have already played out. So everybody that's on these timelines that have the knowledge and technology, they know what's coming. And they're playing in the past to preserve that future. Then it's not about moving into the unknown. Then it's about waking up to what's already played out and understand that there are 5 different timelines that are being narrowed down to be expanded again, to be narrowed down as they converge. And each time that happens, the converging happens, then it changes the other timelines of the past, because then they converge in the future to look at what has happened now. Has we transformed anything? Are we still in the same situation? Is this reality field still in the configuration of being too close to the abyss, and by that have the lack of momentum that ensures that it doesn't get reconfigured completely back into the configuration under the ancient ones? So that's the game. And if we know that that's the game, then we can begin to make valid choices. What would be most prudent for me to do as a human? What should I look into? What should I give energy? And here I'm talking about the principles as I teach them in the transition science classes, where I teach, okay, principle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 8, and 9. How do they play out? What does that mean in our energy reconfiguration? Principle 3, the low participation. What should you look into? If you know what you're looking into is connected to the detrimental timelines that are under what we could call the previous civilizations that wants to remain in the invertedness, the dark ones, or the previous civilizations that wants to remain as the regressed races under the Dracos, or the previous civilizations that are under the transhuman agenda. If we know that that's being played in all the time in whatever's in our world, that what's going on right now on the internet and in our world in its entirety is this pockets, jurisdictional battles between the different timeline groups that are here from different timelines, acting in through different sections of these timelines to try and play out their content to make us participate in their timelines so their futures will play out. If we begin to understand that we are in the middle of this timeline battle, then we also understand that the first and foremost important thing for us to do is to gain control of our energy system, is to gain control of the transformational processes of our energy system. And it is to gain control of who and what we are, what we think and what we feel, and how we operate inside this physical vessel. And control here not means as control in a negative way, because we can't control processes, but understand the processual processes, the transformative processes, and amplify what will create a process into a higher viability rate, other than participate in processes that leads to regression and lesser viability rate. It's about discernment. It's about the wise choice of transformational processes. The enlightenment is technically to know what timeline to be part of, what type of configuration to have, and what type of energy configuration and transformation that is needed to remain in that viability rate, to remain on that configuration that leads to what's called the Pure Lands, the next cycles of progression and development. So if we look at all of this mindfulness, contemplation, inner work, clearing work, self-healing work, the new psychology I'm working with, because that will completely shift us into a different type of inner processes and knowledge that is not based upon spirituality. That because we know that's the second group under the avians, we are no longer participating in these weird, only physical activities, which we know are part of the insectoids, because they want the physical form. They don't really want anything else, because they got their own fourth dimensional configuration they want to put into via the hybrid projects. And we understand the scavengers, that's mainly harvesting programs so they can continue their existence. And then we begin to understand these different dynamics from a completely different angle of this is just another set of reality. like we'll learn to navigate in this reality in the base program as we grew up and matured as human beings. Going from being young people thinking the world was ours to discover that, yes, there's so many limitations and we have to work and we have to do this and we have to do that. And life is technically hard and it's challenging. And going to work is not always easy, or being in a relationship is not always easy. Life is not easy. Life is challenged. Life is process. Life is development. Or become a 5-year-old and say, I don't want to. I don't, blah, 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 the 3 monkeys. I'm not seeing anything, I'm not hearing anything, I'm not saying anything until the world changes. I am silent and I will not participate in it. As was it Avicii that said, wake me up when it's over. But that's not reality. That's denial of reality. And there's only one way to master reality, and that is to embark on, how do I then master reality? And if we understand that reality is energy and consciousness, and we have certain rules and laws and principles, and we have certain ideas of how this can be done, then perhaps it's not that difficult. And that's the seed of all religions under the avians, of all belief systems, that goes with belief, affirmation, intention. If only I think and feel so, then it will be so. But the fact is, it demands more than that, and that's where it needs to shift into science, of how to actually operate in a world of energy and how to implement the principles as part of our lives, as part of understanding the rules of engagement when we begin to connect to the other levels of reality that involves other civilizations, as well as how to be amongst each other as human beings and life forms in a reality field that begins to operate on its original holographic energetic components, which means that what we are will be mirrored back to us via principle 4, the law of reciprocity. So if we understand that, we also understand, well, if I, as the first of many in principle 1, can seed a timeline, activate a reality field in specific configuration, if I have that responsibility, well, then I better up my game and create a individual timeline that will converge with what is for the highest good of the many. And if I understand that the second principle, that if I act out, if I in any ways or forms throw out energy that is detrimental for this timeline and the highest good of the many, and I thereby create polarity, then I should seek the balance point from where what I engineer and what I create will always be of the highest standard and the highest purity rate. That's the balance point. And then we move into principle 3, where we learn that what we look at, we participate in. So we learn mindfulness, as in, what should I amplify? What should I not amplify? How should I use my voice, my thought, my inner processes? So I ensure that the balance point will prosper, and what I will create in my mind will not be detrimental to what I'm vibrationally trying to create on a timeline. So we learn to create a mind that is functional due to the purpose that we have already created. And we understand that our body and our emotions and our minds are the important pieces of the timeline functionality. Hence, the cleansing process of the 3 lower fields, so we disconnect to the base program configurations and reconnect to the original timelines that are being built around us. And here the choice comes in principle 4, where we reflect on what comes our way, tells us, are we on the right timeline, or have we thrown ourselves into some other timeline where we don't belong because we did not follow through with principle 1, 2, and 3, because we participated, looked at, were joined into, or artificially pushed into timelines where we didn't belong, throwing us off the build-up process to regain the true inner knowledge of principle 5 that lead us to the mastery of how to remain on different timelines and how to keep the configuration that we have built. From that one, we can go to principle 6, where we can make the valid choices of which group, which timeline, and what we want to align ourselves with, because there we have the full knowledge via principle 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the mastery of energy and consciousness under these principles. I teach that in the transition science classes as well as in the template science classes. And the energy work classes, I there explain what type of energy work that is needed to get us out of the artificial configurations from the artificial timelines of the civilizations that are not pro-human, but only pro-themselves. So there are solutions, but they are time-consuming and they demand a different lifestyle. So now I have given a little bit of more information and background for those of you who are doing this. As I grow more and more in alignment with what's happening, and I recall more and more, and I get more pieces of my original energy system repaired and back into functionality. More information, of course, will come as I share of what I see and what I remember, and what I see as important to connect to the timelines, not necessarily what is built by the new Andromedans and the future humanities, but for me, what is connected to the original timelines and the original projects I participated in. Because I don't need to go to their timeline. I can support it if I want to at some point. I might converge with it from my timeline to theirs at some point. But right now, I feel it's more important to build an alternative as the first of many from what I recall as being part of the original solar system humanities. And if that I build there becomes an opportunity that can converge with theirs, merge and amplify and give strength to what they are building and vice versa, well, then we can meet as equals and say, this is for the highest good of the many. But I'm not just straight away tapping into what they are building, because there's so many things there that I can't really align with now. I might do later, but right now we still have the potentiality of other timelines. And I would like to seed that in as part of my mission statement and as part of what I came to do when I entered in via the old Andromedan system. So there are many possibilities still in play. These will naturally narrow down within the next 20 years. When it comes to our mission statements, it also comes to the understanding that we do still have the potentiality of creating something dissimilar than what's being decided around us. But we must be aware of the dynamics and the sciences and the mechanics of reality of ourselves and the other civilizations. If we truly want to participate in any co-creation with the others or on our own timeline, and by that perhaps create a new timeline altogether where we can converge with different civilizations in the future. It all comes down to our ability to reactivate, recollect, and remember who and what we are, and how we then choose to implement that in our everyday lives. What we choose to do with these capacities, what we choose to do with this knowledge, as I talk a little bit about in the Changemaker material. Because the first step of the journey is just to reconfigure ourselves and getting the control or the mastery or the ability to administer our energetic fields as well as our everyday life. That's the new whole living. And then we are to implement it into society as part of the realms of the otherness. That's the Changemaker material. And then we need to understand the timeline dynamics of the future. That's the template sciences. We got a lot of work ahead of us, those of us who want to do this. And studying the material is just the first step. Working with it in everyday life is the next. Implementing it, integrating it, making it part of everything we are, so we no longer just respond with the habitual pattern of the base program and what we have learned so far, but respond to every energetic event, be it inner or outer, with the new system of thought, with the new ideas, within the scope of the principles and the rules and the natural laws of energy utilization. Then we change everything we are to align to the timelines that work with the original reality field programs and not the ones that are being thrown at us or presented to us as this is the best solution, as we are getting more or less brainwashed by whatever we are engaging in the inner or outer realms of whomever and whatever. Is it our time to follow a teacher? Well, if you don't belong to this system, that's the only option to learn what this system is about. If you are from this solar system, you can follow a teacher for a period of time, but at the end of the day, the only knowledge that will truly get you there is the one that you are able to activate within yourself as you reconnect to the original holographic energetic teaching system of this reality field. From that on, you will know from within what to do. Unfortunately, also this has been intercepted, and there's a lot of interception technology that pretends to be our inner voice, when in fact it is energetic inclusions connected to the distortion fields. There's a lot of discernment to be learned in this journey. There's a lot of repairing, a lot of self-healing, and a lot of self-nurturing, as well as a lot of self-patience, and the full understanding of what the sciences actually are in studies, in everyday living, with the challenges of the base program, with the challenges of being in families, with the challenges of being in relationships, with the challenges of being human altogether. So it's not an easy journey. It's a journey for a lifetime. It's a new lifestyle. Thank you.